I want you to just imagine a scenario for a moment. Just picture this playing out in your own.
Okay.
You look at the landscape of your entire professional like the field you've dedicated your education daily, and you see this massive, catastrophic collapse on the horizon.
Right, the warning signs are everywhere.
Exact. The economic warning signs are just flashing red. The math just isn't mathing anymore. So you do what you think is the right thing.
Which is usually a mistake, right?
Yeah. You sound the alarm, you stand up in the metaphorical town square, and you say, hey, everyone, a meteor is coming. The foundational economics of our business are crumbling, and we need to brace for it.
And historically speaking, that is exactly the moment when the messenger gets shot.
Yep. That is exactly what happens. Instead of listening to your warnings, your peers just mock the entire internet. Bullies.
You become a pariah.
A total pariah. You are completely blacklisted from your own professional community, smeared as this toxic pessimist, told you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about.
Brutal.
And then, a few years go by, and that exact meteor you warned everyone about, it hits hard, exactly the way you predicted. The layoffs start, the studios close, and suddenly all the people who vilified you are scrambling.
Losing their jobs.
Right. And the top most respected voices in the industry are suddenly echoing the exact same warnings you gave years ago. If you were that original messenger, how would you feel?
I mean, you'd probably feel a deeply conflicting mix of immense righteous validation and an incredible amount of raw, unfiltered frustration.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the ultimate I told you so moment, but it's wrapped up in a genuine industry tragedy.
Right.
Because nobody actually wants to see their industry collapse just to prove a point.
Right. No one wants to see their friends unemployed.
Exactly. But when you're forced to watch people lose their livelihoods because they vehemently refuse to look at the data you were showing them, I mean, the frustration is entirely justified.
And that dynamic, that exact mix of vindication and fury is what we are diving.
Welcome to today's Deep Dive. We are immersing ourselves in a fascinating, fiery, and honestly highly emotionally charged piece of media today.
It really is.
It's a YouTube transcript from a channel called Clownfish TV. And the title is, very appropriately, Animation is Cooked. Clownfish TV was right.
It's a provocative title,
Very.
But it perfectly encapsulates the tone of the material.
It really does. And if you're listening to this and wondering what we're getting into, you should know that this source material is raw.
Very raw.
It's unapologetic. It is a massive cathartic victory lap from creators who were dragged through the mud by their own community just for pointing out the harsh economic realities of the animation business.
But it's so much more than just a venting session.
Yes, and I'm so glad you framed it that way, because that's our goal for this conversation. It'd be easy to look at this video and just see internet drama.
Or creators settling old scores, yeah. Right. But if you look past the completely understandable anger, what you actually find in this transcript is a brutal masterclass, unforgiving business mechanics.
That's precisely what makes this source so compelling for us to examine today. We aren't here to get bogged down in specific online beefs or the day-to-day gossip of the animation world.
No, we want to extract the core nuggets of truth from their warning. We want to understand exactly why the animation industry is currently imploding, according to the data.
From the totally broken economic models of modern streaming platforms to the deeply misunderstood power of physical merchandise.
And the sudden rise of artificial intelligence. We're getting into all of it.
My perspective on this, right from the start, is one of pure analytical fascination. Because the underlying business principles these hosts are describing, the shift in revenue models, the demographic mismatches, the technological disruption, these are not just animation problems.
Right, they apply to everyone.
They are universal business reality. If you work in tech, if you work in publishing, if you work in any industry undergoing a massive paradigm shift, the mechanics of this collapse apply to you.
So if you're ready, let's jump right into the history of this whole mess. Because to really understand the weight of this transcript, we have to understand what happened a few years ago.
The initial learning.
Yeah. The hosts at Clownfish TV looked at the animation and the studio system, the streaming deals, the hiring practice, and they essentially told their audience, danger, an asteroid is coming.
And their advice wasn't just vague doomsaying either.
No, it was specific.
Highly specific, actionable career advice based on market trends. They specifically advised artists to start looking at alternative paths. They suggested either switching careers entirely while there was still time, or if they wanted to stay in art, to start building independent intellectual properties.
What we call IPs.
Right, IP. They told people they needed to create characters and stories that were entirely owned by the artist, essentially building an asteroid-proof bunker outside of the fragile studio system.
They were saying, do not rely on Netflix or Disney to write your paycheck for the next 20, because the math says those paychecks are going to stop bouncing.
And the reaction to that advice, wild to read about.
It's insane. How did the community respond to someone essentially offering a lifeboat?
It is a textbook example of how insulated, highly passionate community react to bad news. They didn't debate the economic. They attacked the message.
Naturally.
The transcript details how the hosts were absolutely pilloried online. They specifically call out platforms like Reddit as being major hubs for this organized back.
And the prevailing narrative quickly became that these creators were grifters.
Oh, yeah. That they knew absolutely nothing about the animation industry, that they were just negative, toxic people who wanted to ruin everyone's fun.
But the crazy thing is, they weren't just outsiders yelling from the cheap.
No, not at all.
They had actual experience.
Exactly. They mentioned having had their own shows optioned in the past.
Wait, let me pause you there. For someone listening who doesn't work in Hollywood, what does it actually mean to have a show optioned? People throw that word around a lot.
That's a great question. So when a creator pitches a show to a network or a studio, and the studio likes the idea, but isn't quite ready to commit millions of dollars to fully produce it.
They want to test the waters.
Right. They will option it. This means the studio pays the creator a fee for the exclusive right to develop that property for a set period of time, say 12 to 18 months.
Okay, so it's a real contract.
Absolutely. During that time, the creator gets paid. They work with studio executives to refine the pitch, write pilot script, create artwork. It is a major professional milestone. It means you are in the room dealing with real money and you understand what executives are looking for.
So they had that experience. They had agents, they had industry insiders, like people currently working at these major studios coming to them privately off the record to talk about how bad things were getting inside the building.
Yes. The private consensus matched their public warnings perfectly.
But
Publicly, the community made them pariah. They were dismissed simply because they delivered an uncomfortable economic forecast that threatened the romanticized worldview of the aspiring art.
And that brings us to the present day. And the sheer validation of this video, the reason they are taking this victory lap now is because the very people the community idolizes are now saying the exact same things.
Word for word.
Yeah. The video points to Matt Braley. He's the creator of the incredibly popular Disney Channel show Amphibia, massive name in modern. And he is now publicly talking about the utter state of television animation, how dire things are looking, the systemic issues.
They also point to Matt Danner, who is a veteran with a huge list of credits spanning decades in the animation.
Right.
And he is stepping up and outlining the exact same dire economic reality, specifically regarding how shows are funded and the critical need for merchandise.
So it's all coming out now.
What is truly fascinating here is observing the life cycle of a disruptive truth.
How do you mean?
Well, when a hard, paradigm-shifting truth is introduced to an ecosystem, it generally goes through three distinct phases.
Okay.
First, it's ridiculed. People laugh at it because it seems absurd compared to the status quo.
Right.
Second, when the evidence starts becoming undeniable, the truth is violently opposed. People attack it because it threatens their livelihood or their worldview.
And the third?
And finally, the third phase. It is accepted as being entirely self-evident. Everyone acts as if they knew it all along.
Oh, wow. That perfectly tracks with what happened here.
We are currently watching the animation industry transition painfully from that violent opposition phase into the self-evident phase. The major creators are now openly discussing these realities, making them self-evident.
But the tragedy, and I guess the reason there is so much raw emotion in the source material, is the immense collateral damage that happened during that middle. The people who tried to break the echo chamber early paid a severe social and professional price. Let's dive into that collateral damage because the video provides some incredibly specific, really telling anecdotes about the cost of stepping out of line.
The young YouTube.
Exactly. There's a story they tell about a young, recent college graduate who had a YouTube channel focused on animation. From what the transcript implies, she was very new to the profession.
Maybe had a tiny bit of entry-level experience.
Yeah, but essentially still operating with the student's mindset. And she dedicated a significant amount of her time to making these screeching, hand-wringing expose videos entirely focused on calling the Clownfish TV hosts liars.
Right. Her core argument was that the animation industry was perfectly fine, the studios were benevolent, and that any warnings of economic contract completely fabricated doom-mongering.
Which is wild. Why do you think someone with so little experience would go to such extreme lengths against creators?
It highlights a deep naivete that often permeates creative field, particularly among recent graduates.
Yeah.
You have students leaving art school with a massive amount of debt and a beautiful dream. They have been sold this narrative that if they just follow their passion, if they just draw well enough, the industry will welcome them with open arms.
And provide a stable, lifelong career.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when someone comes along and challenges that romanticized view with hard economic data pointing out that the business models are failing, the reaction from a young artist isn't to dispassionately evaluate the data.
No, that would...
The immediate psychological reaction is to attack the messenger in order to protect the dream.
It's a defense mechanism.
Completely. But the problem with defense mechanisms is that reality always wins eventually.
It does.
The hosts note a very poignant detail about this young YouTuber. Once the industry actually started contracting, once the massive layoffs at places like Netflix, animation, and various studios actually began hitting her peers,
she quietly went back and deleted all of her videos attacking Clownfish.
She erased.
Because reality hit. You can't leave videos up calling someone a liar for predicting layoffs when your friends are currently standing in the unemployment.
It's a harsh wake-up call.
And it wasn't just young, naive creators participating in this mob mentality. The transcript talks about how deeply toxic this echo chamber became at all levels of the profession.
It was systemic.
Yeah, the name Clownfish TV was completely blacklisted in animation circles. If you even mentioned them in a positive light or shared one of their videos in a forum, you were immediately shunned. It was like they were Voldemort.
It is the literal definition of professional excommunication. An echo chamber doesn't just survive by rewarding the people who agree with the consensus.
Right.
It survives by brutally demonstrating the severe social and professional penalty for associating with dissenters. It serves as a warning to everyone else. Look what we did to them. Keep your mouths shut.
And the most heartbreaking example of that threat in action is the anecdote they share about Maxwell Adams.
That was hard to read.
For you listening, if you don't know that name, Maxwell Adams is a major, highly respected figure in this world. He is the creator of the beloved classic Cartoon Network show, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy.
A true veteran.
He's a legend. Our source notes that Adams actually had the courage to publicly agree with them during the height of the backlash. He posted online that what Clownfish TV was saying about the industry's financial state was correct.
And we should provide some context on where Adams was coming from when he made that post.
Right, it wasn't just a casual observation.
The transcript notes that despite his legacy, Adams was struggling deeply. He was living the reality of the economic downturn. The host mentioned that he was having so much trouble getting new shows optioned that he was literally selling off his own personal belongings just to make ends meet.
Which is just awful to think about. A guy who created a cultural touchstone that defined a generation of kids struggling to pay the bills. So he speaks up. He validates the warning. What happens next? Does the community stop and say, oh, wow, the creator of Billy and Mandy says things are bad. Maybe we should.
No, they did the exact opposite.
Of course.
They turned on him. The community bullied this revered veteran relentlessly. They attacked him so viciously, simply for daring to name check the blacklisted creators and agree with their financial assessment.
It's insane.
It got so bad that he eventually caved to the pressure and took his post down.
That is just terrifying.
It is a testament to the sheer terrifying power of a highly insulated echo chamber. It can silence even the people who have the undeniable credentials, the legacy, and the firsthand experience to know better simply through the threat of relentless social ostracization.
If the guy who made Billy and Mandy can get bullied into silence by a bunch of people who probably grew up loving his work, what hope does a mid-level storyboard artist have of speaking up?
None. And this raises an important question for you, the listener, regardless of what field you work in.
Yeah, think about this.
How often do we do this in our own professional life? How often do we actively ignore uncomfortable truth or participate in the silencing of dissent simply because the person delivering the warning disrupts our comfortable view of our industry?
Wow, yeah.
Whether you are in real estate watching housing prices inflate or in tech watching venture capital dry up, we are naturally wired to reject the doomsayer because we desperately don't want the doom to be real.
But as this transcript so pointedly illustrates, closing your eyes and plugging your ears doesn't stop the meteor from hitting.
It really doesn't.
Okay, let's unpack. We've established the immense social cost of ignoring it, but let's actually look at what that meteor is made of. What is the actual financial math that broke down here?
The economic.
Right, because the animation industry used to print money. What changed? This brings us to the broken economics of anime, specifically looking at the massive tectonic shift from linear television to streaming platforms.
To understand why the system is utterly broken today, we have to look back at how it functioned at its peak. We have to examine what we might call the golden age of the funnel.
The funnel?
Yes, the transcript spends a significant amount of time discussing the historical business models of legacy networks, specifically focusing on the Disney Channel and Nickelodeon.
Yeah, and the Disney Channel history they bring up is fascinating because I think a lot of people my age just assume the Disney Channel was always what it was without, a basic cable channel packed with commercial toys and junk.
But it didn't start that way.
Not at all. And understanding that evolution, the Disney Channel originally launched as a premium paid subscription, very much in the exact same vein as HBO or Showtime.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you had to call your cable provider and pay an extra monthly fee specifically to get the Disney Channel because it was subscription-based, free.
So what caused them to change it? Why give up that direct subscription revenue to become a basic cable channel?
Because the executives at Disney realized something brilliant about the broader mechanics of their business. They realized that television animation and kids' live-action programming shouldn't be the end product.
It should be the marketing engine.
Exactly. Sometime in the 1990s, they transitioned the Disney Channel to an ad-supported, basic cable model that was bundled into almost every home in America. They sacrificed the premium subscription fee in exchange for massive, ubiquitous...
And the hosts of the video point out exactly why that reach was so valuable. It wasn't just so they could sell 30-second ad spots to Kellogg's for Frosted Flakes.
Right.
The Disney Channel itself became Disney's most powerful in-house advertising engine for its own products.
Yeah.
It was a massive, highly calibrated funnel.
Precisely. Let's break down how this funnel concept actually worked in practice.
Okay.
You provide the audience with a highly entertaining television show, say DuckTales or Kim Possible, at a very low barrier to entry on basic cable. You hook the child's attention. But the show isn't existing in a vacuum. Every commercial break is meticulously designed to push the child further down the Disney monetization. They are running constant high-energy advertisements for Walt Disney World and Disneyland. They're literally conditioning the child to say, "Mom, Dad, take me to Disney."
I remember that vividly. The commercial showing kids running toward Cinderella's castle, meeting Mickey Mouse, it was relentless.
It was a massive driver of billion-dollar park attendance. But the ecosystem didn't stop there. It fed itself in multiple directions.
The live-action stars.
Exactly. The young actors starring in the live-action shows between the cartoons would be pushed over to the music division. They would become recording artists heavily promoted on Radio Disney.
Millions of physical CDs.
Yep. Then, those same stars, now with massive built-in audiences, would be cast in theatrical movie releases, driving massive box office revenue. The television animation and the kids' shows were the wide mouth of the funnel, pulling consumers into a deeply monetized, inescapable ecosystem.
It was a perfectly self-sustaining loop. The TV shows themselves didn't necessarily need to make $1 billion in pure profit because their existence was actively driving billions of dollars in revenue across the theme parks, the music division, and the movie studio.
But then we look at the reality of today.
The collapse.
Yeah. The hosts look at the current landscape and they say linear TV is essentially
It is a total collapse of the traditional distribution method.
The numbers they cite are just staggering. The video mentions that regular live viewership on these legacy linear networks, places that used to be cultural juggernauts like Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, or the Disney Channel, might be hovering around or even under 100,000 viewers for a given broadcast.
Wow.
100,000 viewers across.
For networks that used to command millions of daily viewers, that is statistically irrelevant.
The hosts even have this funny but incredibly dark throwaway line to explain who those 100,000 people even are. They attribute the remaining viewership to grandma leaving teen type. Go on in the background when the grandkids come over, because she doesn't know how to use the smart TV to find anything else.
It's a humorous image, but it highlights a fatal business reality. That remaining audience is entirely passive. It's disconnected viewership.
Yeah.
Grandma leaving the TV on as background noise is not an engaged audience interacting with the Disney funnel. They aren't begging to go to the theme parks. They aren't buying the engine is dead.
Okay, so the obvious counterargument here, and the one the industry used for years to ignore the problem, is, well, linear TV is dying, but streaming is the future. We just moved all those shows to Netflix and Disney Plus and Max.
Right.
Why didn't that save the model?
Because moving to streaming exposed a fundamental truth about the product that the industry had forgotten. This leads us to the absolute core crisis. As the transcript notes, quoting industry sentiment, animation has almost always been what we call in business a loss.
Let's define that for the listeners. A loss leader is a product that a company sells at a loss, meaning it costs more to make than they can sell it for, specifically to attract customers into a store so they will buy other, more profitable things.
Like the rotisserie chickens at Costco.
Exact. Costco loses money on the chicken, but they make it back when you buy a TV while you're there.
Exactly. On cable television, the loss leader of a wildly expensive animated cartoon was heavily subsidized by two things: the broader cable package fees that every household paid, and that massive external merchandising and theme park funnel we just discussed.
The cartoon was the cheap chicken getting you into the Disney Costco.
But when animation moved to streaming platforms, the streamers suddenly looked at their internal data and realized they had a massive multi-million-dollar problem.
They couldn't monetize it.
No, they haven't figured out how to make a new animated show drive new monthly subscription. If Netflix spends $30 million on a new animated series, does that series convince enough new people to sign up for a $15 a month subscription to cover the cost?
Almost never.
Almost never. Furthermore, they haven't figured out how to make these shows generate new, meaningful ad dollars within the streaming interface.
So, as the hosts bluntly put it, the medium simply lost all of its financial value over the past decade. It costs an absolute fortune to produce high-quality anime, but on a streaming service, it operates in a total vacuum.
Right, there's no funnel.
There are no commercials for the theme park. There is no Radio Disney crossover. It fails entirely to trigger the secondary revenue streams that once justified its massive price tag.
It is a product that lost its utility.
Oh.
It is a bridge to nowhere.
Man, when you lay it out like that, it's so obvious why the bubble burst.
Yeah.
But if the TV shows were just the bridge, where was the actual hard cash coming from?
This is the best part.
Because we talked about theme parks and movies, but there is a much bigger, much more lucrative engine that drove this industry for decades. Here's where it gets really... This brings us to what might be the most fascinating part of the merchandising misunderstanding, the toyetic-phobia.
If you want to understand the true bedrock of the animation's historical success,
The biggest secret in animation is that the real money isn't in the real money is in the
Yeah.
The video cites the veteran animator, Matt Danner again, who explicitly states this fact. Animation is a loss leader, and the real profit is entirely generated by license. And the hosts use this mind-blowing SpongeBob SquarePants.
Oh, the SpongeBob step.
They note that SpongeBob makes literally billions. And do you know where a massive chunk of that revenue?
Underwear.
It sounds absurd, but it is entirely accurate. They say it straight up. SpongeBob keeps the lights on at Nickelodeon because they sell an unfathomable amount of kids' and adults' apparel. Just millions of pairs of boxer shorts with a yellow...
And the transcript helpfully breaks down the industry terminology for this merchandising ecosystem, which I think is crucial for anyone trying to understand the business to grasp. When we talk about merch, there are two distinct primary categories that licensing executives look at. You have what is called soft line.
What's whole?
Soft lines include anything made of fabric or textiles. So that is your apparel, your pajamas, the SpongeBob underwear, blankets, and significantly plushies or stuffed animals.
Okay, got it.
And then on the other side, you have hardline merch. This refers primarily to molded plastic. Action figures, vehicles, large plastic playset, role-play items like plastic swords or blasters.
The toys?
Right. A truly successful, multi-billion-dollar animated IP needs to be designed from the ground up to move massive volumes of both softline and hardline merchandise.
And this business model goes all the way back to the golden age of the 1980s and 1990s. Now, a lot of modern critics, and even modern animators, look back at shows from those eras, shows like He-Man, Transformers, G.I. Joe, or My Little Pony, and they dismiss them.
They roll their eyes.
Yeah, they say, oh, those shows were terrible. They were just half-hour cynical toy commercials.
Yes. That is the prevailing critical consensus today.
But the hosts of Clownfish TV hear that criticism, and they enthusiastically agree with it, but not in a bad way. They literally say, yes, they were just toy commercials. Oh my God, of course they were.
Because that was the whole point.
Right. They explain that being a toy commercial wasn't a failure of art. It was the financial reality that kept Stree employed. Those massive toy sales are what kept the shows on the air, paid the animators, and funded the studios.
But the hosts take it a step further, and this is where the transcript moves from basic economics into a truly profound psychological insight.
This part blew my mind.
They offer a brilliant breakdown of why those cynical toy commercials from the 80s and 90s are still so deeply beloved today. Why do 40-year-olds still cry when they hear the Transformers theme song?
So true.
The hosts argue that it wasn't just the writing or the animation quality. It was the physical, multi-sensory connection.
Yes. Let's linger on this because it's fascinating. They start talking about sensory memory, specifically the sense of smell.
Right, the perfume.
Yeah, one of the hosts shares this incredibly vivid personal anecdote. They talk about a specific lemon vanilla perfume that they used to wear exclusively when they went on vacations parks. Now, decades later, if they spray just a tiny bit of that perfume in their house, their kids will immediately walk into the room and say, oh, it smells like Disney.
It brings rushing back all of these intense, positive nostalgic memories associated with those trips.
And they tie this phenomenon directly to the way vintage toys were manufactured. They start listing off these highly specific engineered scents of toy. They mention the original strawberry shortcake dolls, which actually heavily of artificial strawberries.
They also mention very specific action figures, which shows how deep their knowledge goes. They bring up Perfuma, a character from the She-Ra line who had a distinct floral scent.
And He-Man.
Yeah, characters from the He-Man line, like Moss Man, who was flocked with fuzz and famously smelled like pine needle, and a villain named Stinkor, who was literally molded with patchouli oil to make him smell terrible.
I remember Stinkor. If you touched him, your hands smelled like patchouli for 3 days. But why did the toy companies do that? Was it just a gimmick?
It may have started as a gimmick to stand out on the shelf, but it taps into incredibly powerful neurological realities. The olfactory bulb, the structure in the front of the brain that processes smells, is intimately directly connected to the amygdala and the hippocampus.
And what do those parts of the brain?
They are the specific regions responsible for processing emotion and forming long-term memories.
Wow.
Because of this direct biological wiring, scent is tied to memory more strongly and rapidly than almost any other human sense. So, consider the experience of a child in 1985. They are sitting on the carpet watching the He-Man cartoon on the television.
Engaging eyes and ears.
Exactly. But simultaneously, they are physically holding their Moss Man action figure. They are engaging their sense of touch by feeling the fuzzy texture, and they are inhaling that distinct pine scent.
They're actively playing out the stories in the real world while watching them on the screen.
Exactly. As the hosts brilliantly point out, any teacher or educational psychologist can tell you that the more sensory connections you can build with a subject, the more deeply it encodes into long-term memory.
That makes total sense.
That 80s child was forging a massive, multi-sensory, permanent nostalgic bond with that property.
Yeah.
The source argues that this physical, tangible interaction is precisely why these older franchises have massive cultural footprints today, whereas modern, critically acclaimed, shows that lack merchandise fail to build that kind of permanent legacy.
And that psychological insight leads directly into their blistering critique of modern animation over the last decade.
The demographic shift.
Yeah. The hosts point out that there has been a massive cultural shift in what gets greenlit. They refer to this recent era, and again, we're looking at this purely neutrally through the lens of business analysis and demographic mismatch. They refer to it as the Tumblr style, or the activist hipster era of cartoon.
Right. And to reiterate, we are not evaluating the artistic merit, the writing, or the cultural themes of these shows. Many of them are critically acclaimed for good reason.
Absolutely.
What we are analyzing and what the source is analyzing is the catastrophic financial failure of this specific era's business model.
It all comes down to a total misunderstanding of who the target audience is versus how the network plans to make money. The creators of these modern shows were often crafting highly serialized, emotionally complex content that appealed deeply to older audience, teenagers, college students, young adults active on social media.
But the networks producing them were still operating on the legacy children's merchandise model.
It is a profound demographic mismatch. The source provides excellent, highly specific examples of this failure in action. They bring up the show Steven Universe.
Now, I want to play devil's advocate here for a second. Because Steven Universe was huge.
Massive.
It had an incredibly passionate online following. There was fan art everywhere. Conventions were packed with cosplayers. How does a show with that much cultural footprint fail financially?
Because you have to ask who was generating that online footprint. As the hosts point out, it wasn't 7-year-olds. It was teenagers and adults writing fan fiction and arguing on Twitter. So the network, seeing the show's popularity, decides to monetize it using the traditional hardline merch route. They release Steven Universe Mega Bloks building sets, which are designed for children.
And what happened?
As the transcript notes, those building sets went straight to the clearance aisle. They gathered dust on the shelf because the adults who were obsessively watching the show and writing essays about its theme are not the primary demographic that goes to Target to buy physical building block toys.
The audience and the monetization strategy were entirely misaligned.
They bring up Adventure Time as well, which is another massive critical darling. Now, Adventure Time actually started out quite successful with merchandise in its early when it was more episodic.
But it changed.
Yeah, the hosts point out that as the show went on, the creators actively aged up the theme, cater to their growing adults.
Yes, the transcript mentions that the show leaned heavily into what the internet calls shippers.
Let's explain that term for the uninitiated. Shippers are fans online who become deeply, sometimes obsessively, invested in two characters being in a romantic relationship, hence shipping.
Precisely. The creators saw that engagement online and began writing the show to deal with much heavier topics. The hosts describe it as characters dealing with existential crises in your 20s.
Right.
It makes for compelling television for adults. But when you do that, you completely alienate the core demographic of young children who actually bug their parents to buy plastic toys. You trade a lucrative merchandising demographic for social media engagement, which does not pay the bills.
They also point to a show called Infinity Train, which had great critical acclaim and a rabid adult fan base. But the hosts note it was explicitly canceled by the network because the executives simply couldn't figure out how to create merchandise for it. No merch means no money, and no money means cancellation, regardless of how many people sign a petition online.
And it isn't just a problem with legacy linear networks failing to adapt. The tech-forward streaming platforms are failing at this even harder.
So much harder.
The hosts highlight that streaming platforms have proven to be essentially anti-merch and licensing. They have no institutional knowledge of how to build physical product lines.
They list some massive global pop culture hits to prove this point. They talk about Squid Game on Netflix. That was the biggest show in the world for a month.
It was ever.
They mention the video game adaptation Cuphead and the animated series Last Kids on Earth. And they point out how the streamers totally fumbled the merchandising opportunities for all of them. They didn't have the toys ready when the shows peaked.
Classic mistake.
By the time the merch hit shelves, the algorithmic hype cycle had already moved on. They left millions, if not billions of dollars on the table because they don't have the infrastructure or the mindset to capitalize on physical product.
Which brings us to a really fascinating cultural irony within the animation industry itself, something the hosts call the sellout stigma.
Yeah, let's unpack. Because there is this prevailing attitude among modern animators that making a show toyetic, meaning intentionally designed to sell toys with cool vehicles and action features, is somehow a massive compromise of art.
It is viewed as selling out to corporate greed.
The transcript points out the staggering, almost comical hypocrisy. They cite the veteran Matt Danner, who openly laughs at these younger artists who claim they refuse to make toyetic shows out of artistic print. He says, look at their actual desks. Look at their office cubicles at the studios. What do you see?
They are completely covered in toys.
Exactly. The artists themselves are massive toy collectors. They spend their own paychecks buying vintage Ninja Turtles and high-end Japanese robot figures.
The irony is rich.
They are entirely driven by the very physical nostalgia that they simultaneously refuse to create for the next generation. It is a misplaced, performative, hipster mentality that views commerce as an enemy to art, even while their own artistic senses were shaped by commerce.
And while these specific artists are looking down their noses at making toy commercials, the hosts point out the franchises that are absolutely dominating the global economy. They list the true behemoth.
Like what?
They bring up Pokemon. A lot of people just think of Pokemon as a video game series, but the hosts correctly identify it as the single biggest multimedia franchise in the history of the world. It's games, trading cards, plush toys, apparel, movies. It's an inescapable merchandise empire.
They mention Hello Kitty, which is essentially pure merchandising without even needing a narrative show to support it.
Right.
They mention Winnie the Pooh, pointing out that it absolutely dominates the entire baby aisle at any major retailer. And Mario, which just had a billion-dollar movie that was essentially a 2-hour commercial for a Nintendo product.
And crucially, they highlight modern juggernauts that are currently doing exactly what the 80s shows did. They specifically name-check Cocomelon and Bluey. As one of the hosts vividly puts it, these shows sell toys out the ass.
And why do they sell so well? Because the creators of Bluey and Cocomelon are not embarrassed about being commercial. They are creating the exact same multi-sensory, highly merchandised connection with toddlers today that He-Man and Strawberry Shortcake did in the 90s.
And because they embrace the business model, they are financially invincible. They will run forever.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the critically acclaimed artsy shows that refuse to sell toys are being prematurely canceled and literally scrubbed from streaming platforms for tax write-offs.
It's a brutal reality.
If you are listening right now, I really want you to stop and think about this for a sec. Think about your absolute favorite movie or TV from when you were 7 or 8 years old. Was it really just the witty dialogue and the plot structure that you love? Or was it the physical artifacts you owned?
The lunchbox.
Exactly. Was it the Star Wars lunchbox you carried to school every single day? Was it the specific heavy feel of the plastic on a Ninja Turtle action figure in your hand? It's those physical things that cement our love for the art. When modern creators reject the physical product because they think it's beneath them, they might actually be rejecting their own art.
That's a powerful.
Okay, so we've covered the total collapse of network television, and we've covered the disastrous failure to understand merch. Let's shift gears and look at what happens when creators try to escape that broken. Because for a long time, the prevailing wisdom was, if the studios are broken, just go to the internet.
Yes, the democratization of media, the belief that platforms like YouTube were a safe haven where creators could bypass the executives and build direct, sustainable businesses.
Exact. But according to this transcript, that digital bubble is bursting just as violently as the legacy media bubble. We're looking at the YouTube ecosystem and the impending asteroid of artificial intelligence.
The digital frontier is proving to be just as ruthless as the corporate studio system, if not more so, because the rules change much faster.
The hosts bring up a very recent, highly illustrative news regarding a massive YouTube anime. The channel is known as the Odd Ones Out. If you have kids or if you watch YouTube animation, you know this channel.
They're huge.
They have around 20 million subscribers. That is a massive global reach that most television networks kill. But recently, news broke that the Odd One Out went through significant, massive layoff of their staff.
And the hosts of Clownfish TV express pure, unadulterated shock at the business structure that led to those layoffs.
Yeah, they break down the math, and it is crazy. They note that the Odd One Out channel had built up a team of roughly 30 full-time people on staff. 30.
That's a mid-sized studio.
But looking at their actual output, the channel only released a handful of videos over the span of an entire year. One of the hosts is just flabbergasted, literally asking into the microphone, "What the hell are you guys doing over there?"
From a pure business efficiency standpoint, it is entirely mind-boggling.
Well, let me stop you, because a casual observer might think, hey, they have 20 million subscribers, every video gets millions of views. Why can't they afford 30?
Because of the underlying mechanics of digital advertising. Supporting 30 full-time salaries, plus benefits, office space, and production costs on the ad revenue generated by only a few YouTube videos a year is an incredibly unsustainable burn rate.
The math doesn't...
The hosts cite a comment from an article on the gaming website Kotaku that perfectly explains the grim reality. The YouTube advertising money has simply dried up over the last few years.
Why did it dry up?
It comes down to CPM. For those unfamiliar, CPM stands for cost per mil, or cost per thousand. It is the metric that dictates how much an advertiser pays a creator for every 1,000 times an ad is shown on their video.
Okay.
During the golden age of YouTube, those CPMs for animation were relatively healthy. But recently, advertisers have pulled back, the algorithm has changed, and those CPM rates have plummeted. You can no longer sustain a full-time small studio team purely on ad rev, even if you have tens of millions of subscribers and millions of views. The math simply does not support the overhead.
And it's not just the ad rates falling, it's the audience's shifting attention. The hosts point out that the general interest and search volume for long-form animation on YouTube is in massive decline. People simply aren't going to YouTube to search for storytime animators the way they used to 5 years ago.
They're watching TikToks or playing Roblox.
Right. To really drive home why the YouTube animation market is suddenly so precarious, the hosts provide a fascinating historical parallel from their own career. It perfectly illustrates the danger of building a business on a platform you don't control.
The webcomic comparison.
Yes. Yeah. They compare the current YouTube animation crash to the webcomic boom of the early 2000s.
This is such a cool bit of history. They give some of their own background here to establish their internet credibility. Back in the day, long before YouTube animation was huge, the hosts ran a very successful early webcomic called Shadowbinders on a portal site called KingSpot. They were peers with major early internet creator like Tom Fishbach, who writes the comic Two Kind and actually happens to be the brother of the massive YouTuber Markiplier. So they were deep in this early internet culture.
But they highlight a key technological difference between that era and today. Back in the early days of webcomics, to publish your work, you had to essentially host your own website. You had to pay for server space. You had to manage the HTML code. You had to build the infrastructure, and you had to drive your own traffic.
Right. There was no app where you just hit upload. You had to be a bit of a web developer.
Exactly. In economics, we call that a high barrier. Because it was technically difficult, time-consuming, and cost money to start, only the most dedicated, serious creators and
it weeded people out.
That friction naturally limited the amount of competition, which allowed the high-quality work to be discovered. It allowed the cream to rise to the top and build sustainable audience.
But then tech evolved.
Yes. Platforms like Tapastic and Webtoon came along, and their entire business model was based on removing that friction. They provided sleek, easy-to-use apps where absolutely anyone could upload a comic for free in 5 minutes right from their phone. Suddenly, the barrier to entry went from high to app zero.
Which sounds great for democracy, right? Everyone gets to be an artist. But what actually happened to the creators trying to make a living?
The market completely flooded. The hosts point out that overnight, you went from competing against maybe 100 serious peers who were running their own sites to competing against 10,000 or 100,000 hobbyists uploading content constantly.
You get drowned out.
It became absolutely impossible to stand out in that infinite sea of content unless the platform's algorithm specifically chose to bless.
And they argue that this exact same lowering of the barrier to entry is happening to animation right now. The tools to animate have gotten cheaper and easier to use, but more importantly, the barrier is about to be obliterated completely by the final massive boss of this industry crisis.
Artificial intelligence.
AI is the asteroid they were warning everyone about. It is the technology that will fundamentally restructure the labor economic of the entire creative class.
No, I think a lot of people just assume all AI is the same and that artists just hate all of it universally. But the hosts actually have a very nuanced take on this, which I think is crucial to understand.
You do.
They distinguish between two very different implementations of the technology. First, there is what they refer to as AI slop.
This is the implementation that most people are familiar with from social media. It is purely generative, low-effort content created by prompting an AI to do all the work.
Right. They use the example of those weird, slightly terrifying AI-generated dancing cat videos that clutter up YouTube Shorts or TikTok.
Exactly. And the threat of the slop isn't that it is artistically brilliant. The threat is volume. It is incredibly hard for a human artist who might spend a month painstakingly crafting a beautiful 3-minute animated short film to compete for algorithmic attention against a content farm in another country that can use AI to generate 1,000 dancing cat videos a day.
The algorithm doesn't care about the effort.
Exactly. The human work just gets drowned out by the sheer volume of the slop in the recommendation.
But here's where the hosts make a vital. The slop is annoying, and it ruins discoverability. But it isn't the actual existential threat to the professional animation pipeline.
No, it's not.
The real threat, and simultaneously the only viable path forward for survival, is AI used strictly as a tool within a professional workflow.
They give a fantastic, highly specific example of what this looks like in practice. They mentioned seeing a production group that was utilizing advanced AI technology, but they weren't just typing, make a cartoon into a prompt box.
Right.
Instead, a team of human artists would physically paint beautiful, detailed textures and background. Then they used an AI tool to map those human-painted textures onto a 3D moving environment, literally creating the illusion of a hand-painted moving world.
So it still required human artistry, but the AI did the heavy lifting of the physics.
Precisely. The AI handled the incredibly tedious, time-consuming labor of texturing and what we call tweening.
Let's define tweening for the listeners who haven't worked in animation.
In traditional animation, a senior animator draws the keyframe, the major, important poses of a character in motion. For example, a character starting to jump and the character landing.
Okay.
But to make that motion look smooth on film, you need dozens of drawings in between those keyframes. Historically, those in-between frames, the tweening, were drawn by junior animators. It was tedious entry-level work, but it was how young artists got their foot in the door and learned the trade.
And what happens when an AI tool can instantly generate perfect in-between frames based on the senior animator frames?
You no longer need to hire a room full of junior animators. You eliminate the entry-level tier of the profession entirely. A single senior animator, armed with the right AI tools, can do the work of an entire department in a fraction of the time.
And this leads to a really hard, uncomfortable truth for the industry, which the hosts lay out with brutal clarity. They predict that in the very near future, outside of perhaps the very top tier, $100 million blockbuster film, Disney or Pixar day-to-day television animation jobs are going to fundamentally irrevocably.
Yeah, they will.
They predict that most of the work will be heavily outsourced for labor markets in other countries. It will largely be non-union, and it will absolutely 100% require the mastery of AI to maintain the required.
The source is brutally honest about the limits of labor organizing in the face of this kind of technological and economic. They note that simply having a union job does not guarantee your safety when the foundational business model collapses.
Yeah, they mentioned a really sobering anecdote about workers at the video game Ubisoft. Some workers at a studio in Canada successfully unionized, celebrated as a huge victory for labor.
But then what happened?
Only a very short time later, the company announced massive layoffs that
Because the underlying economic reality is unforgiving. When the corporate money runs out, or when the cost of production exceeds the value of the final product, the jobs simply disappear. It does not matter if the position is unionized or not. If the company shutters the division, the job is gone.
It's just math.
The conclusion the hosts draw is stark, but necessary for survival. The artists who are willing to bite the bullet swallow their pride, adapt, and learn how to master AI as a tool to increase their own productivity are the ones who are going to keep their jobs.
And the artists who refuse to touch AI out of a noble artistic principle,
they will simply be left behind by the market. It is an adapt or die scenario.
Which perfectly sets up our final segment, the ultimate lesson. After laying out all this massive, undeniable evidence, the collapse of linear streaming failures, the total lack of merchandise strategy, YouTube advertising crash, and the looming AI disruption, the hosts take a final, well-deserved victory.
To prove they weren't just nobodies yelling at the clouds.
Exactly. They understood the machine from the inside.
It is so important that they establish their credibility here at the end, precisely because the internet mob tried so hard to erase it. They reveal a piece of their own history that is incredibly telling. About 12 years ago, long before they were YouTube commentators, they successfully pitched multiple show concepts to Disney.
And they explain why those pitches were successful. It wasn't just because they drew cute characters or wrote a funny script. It was because they walked into that boardroom understanding the executive's real problem.
For pitches inherently included detailed, actionable plans for video game tie-ins, toy lines, and merchandising.
They didn't just pitch a piece of art, they pitched a comprehensive monetization strategy.
They understood the funnel. They walked into the room communicating. They knew exactly how the studio was going to make its massive investment back.
But because they spent years trying to explain that exact funnel to a younger generation of artists who just wanted to be artsy, they got destroyed online. And you can feel the raw, unfiltered emotion of that betrayal in the transcript.
You really can.
There is this visceral moment where one of the hosts literally says they want to punch Bob the dummy, which they explain is an actual physical punching bag they keep in the office, affectionately named Bob.
Yeah.
They want to punch it just to let out the physical frustration of having been so incredibly right about the economics and having been treated so terribly by their peers for trying to warn them.
And that frustration leads to the core thesis of this entire deep. If you take away only one lesson from everything we've discussed today, it is the simple, undeniable maxim the hosts lay out at the end. Business is business, whether it's animation or hamburgers.
I love that quote so much. It is so brutally democratic. It doesn't matter if you are crafting beautiful, emotional, hand-drawn art that makes people cry, or if you are slicing patties on a grill at a fast food joint. If the product costs more to make than it generates in revenue, the business closes. The math all.
The host used this transcript to essentially plead with the creative class to get their heads out of the cloud. They acknowledge that wanting to be artsy-fartsy, to prioritize pure expression over commerce, is perfectly fine. It's a wonderful thing if it is a hobby.
Right. If you're doing it on the weekends for your own soul, go wild.
But if you are demanding a sustainable, full-time, high-paying career in the mainstream corporate entertainment industry, you cannot afford to ignore the economics of your medium. You have to look at your art as a business.
You really do.
You have to understand your target demographics. You have to understand merchandising pipelines, distribution models, customer acquisition costs, and technological leverage. Because if you choose to ignore the business side of the industry will eventually ignore you.
And that is the harsh but incredibly valuable truth that the echo chambers simply were here until the pink slip started going out. Wow, we have been on quite a journey today.
We really have.
We started by looking at the deep social danger of ignoring warnings and the destructive power of insulated online echo chambers that silence dissenting voices just to protect their own comfort. We unpacked the broken economics of television, showing step by step how the loss of the Disney funnel and the shift to streaming completely destroyed the financial value of animation as a loss.
It's all connected.
We explored the lost art of merch, diving deep into the neurology and psychology of why tactile toys in specific sense create lifelong nostalgia, and how the performative sellout stigma crippled modern shows financially. And finally, we looked at the digital frontier, how the YouTube ad bubble burst, and the absolute necessity of treating creative passions as a rigorous business in the face of the AI asteroid.
It has been a comprehensive, slightly terrifying look at an industry undergoing a forced, painful evolution.
And if you are listening to this right now and thinking, well, I don't draw cartoons for a living, so why does this matter to me? I want you to look at your own industry. Maybe you work in finance or healthcare or corporate tech or retail. The lesson here isn't about how to draw a cartoon. It is entirely about adaptability and intellectual honesty.
Exactly.
When someone in your field points at the sky and says a meteor is coming, don't ignore them just because you don't like their tone or because their warning disrupts your comfortable view of the world. Don't join the mob attacking the messenger. Look at the raw data. Evaluate the underlying business model, because the people who survived the meteor strike are the ones who saw it coming and started building a shelter, not the ones who closed their eyes and pretended it was just a shooting star.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to ponder long after this deep dive ends.
Let's hear it.
We spent a lot of time today discussing how the strongest, most enduring nostalgic bonds to media are formed through physical, tactile interaction. We talked about the smell of a plastic toy, the weight of an action figure in a child's hand, the ability to physically hold the art you love. If that multisensory physical connection is neurologically required to cement a permanent cultural memory, what happens to the current generation of children?
Wow.
Their media consumption is almost entirely digital, algorithmic, and intangible. Will the critically acclaimed, deeply emotional shows of today be completely forgotten by history in 20 years simply because this generation never had the chance to hold them in their hands?
Man, that is a fascinating, slightly terrifying question to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you walk away with a sharper eye for the business realities hiding behind the art and keep learning, keep questioning the echo chamber. See you next time. Goodbye.